Testing. Okay. So this is about the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is another circulatory system that um, supports the circulatory system that deals with blood. It's about returning fluids back to the cardiovascular system. So it consists of a couple of parts. There's a network of lymphatic vessels, so they are very much like veins. There's the lymph, which is the fluid that passes through it, and lymph is really interstitial fluid that's found in the lymphatics. And there are these organs called the lymph nodes. We'll get to them later. So what does the lymphatic system do to us? Basically, there's two main functions. It returns the interstitial fluid back to the blood, and any junk that's in the interstitial fluid, any plasma proteins, any bacteria, anything like that's there, and kind of any chunks that are in the interstitial fluid end up in the lymph. The fluid is returned to the blood plasma where it originally came from, and if you remember the class on bulk flow, with 10 out and 9 back, its lymph is that extra 1. And it also provides the place where the immune system works. Because the lymphatics draw up any chunks that are in the lymph or in the interstitial fluid, that includes bacteria and pathogens and such, it makes it the ideal place to actually attack those pathogens. So the difference between interstitial fluid and lymph is where it's found, and that's really the only difference. So we're going to see that we have lymph capillaries almost everywhere where there are blood capillaries, because the lymph or the interstitial fluid is produced at the capillary beds, and so therefore that excess should be picked up at the same spot. We're going to look specifically at lymph capillaries in a few minutes, but this is a picture of what they end up looking like. They're kind of blind-ended tubes. So the lymph vessels themselves are like veins. They have the same structure as veins. But it's a one-way thing. Lymph flows from the periphery back towards the heart, and it enters the circulatory system right just above the heart. There's a couple of different types of lymph vessels. There are the lymph capillaries, which are basically the collecting vessels, or the gathering up vessels. And then all the lymph capillaries feed into these things called collecting vessels, and the collecting vessels join together to make bigger collecting vessels, etc., etc. And then all those collecting vessels join together to form trunks, and then the trunks come together to form ducts, and then the ducts are what anastomoses with the veins, and so that the contents of the ducts ends up mixing with blood at the veins. So the smallest and kind of the beginning point are the lymph capillaries, and like blood capillaries, they are made up of simple squamous epithelium. They are way more permeable than blood capillaries. They not only do they take up liquid more easily, but they also are more permeable to larger things. And these endothelial cells, this squamous epithelium, the cells, rather than being held together by tight junctions and kind of butted together, they overlap each other, and these little flaps are called mini valves. And then the mini valves, the edge of the thing is of the cell, has some collagen fibers that is embedded in tissues. Now that has two things. These filaments prevent the collapse of capillaries, but they also open up the flaps more when there's edema, when there's more interstitial fluid. We find the lymph capillaries virtually everywhere where there are normal, continuous blood capillaries. We don't have them in places where there are sinusoidal capillaries in the cardiovascular system. So that would be bones, teeth, bone marrow, and the central nervous system. There are some specialized lymphatic capillaries that are found in the villi of the digestive system, which we will talk about. And these things are called the lacteals. Lacteal looks like the word milk, lactose. And it's because the fluid that's picked up by the villi in the digestive system, especially the small intestine, are loaded with fat, and fat and water together make a milky looking substance. And we call this this absorbed fat and the fatty lymph, we call it chyle. And this is the way fats from our diet end up in our bloodstream. So the little filaments here anchor the flaps of the endothelium into the connective tissue that's surrounding the interstitial fluid. And when there's a lot of interstitial fluid, that connective tissue moves apart and pulls on these filaments, which then opens the flap, which allows easier access fluid into the capillary. And the holes get big enough that proteins and other things can go through. If there's not enough interstitial fluid, then these flaps close and there's less lymph produced, and more interstitial fluid stays. Okay. So it maintains balance that way. So the collecting vessels are like veins. They get slightly thinner walls, and the valves are more frequent. Lots of anastomosis. They travel with the superficial veins, or they travel with the deep vessels. The walls of them are supplied by little arterioles called the vasa vasorum, the same as blood vessels, because the walls need nutrients as well. There's more internal valves in them because lymph moves far more slowly. Lymph moves about, it's measured in liters per day, where veins are measured in liters per minute. So we need more valves to keep them moving. So all of these collecting vessels come together, and they form these things called lymphatic trunks. So these are kind of the largest collecting vessels. So there's two of them in the lumbar region called the lumbar. There's two kind of in the chest around the lungs left and right bronchiomediastinal. There's two that are right under your clavicle, so right in your shoulder region, called the subclavian. There's two that come from your head, and they're called the jugular trunks. And then there's one that runs right along with your digestive system called the intestinal trunk. So basically, you have 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 trunks. The lumbar takes all the lymph from the lower limbs and the abdomen, the abdominal walls, rather. The bronchiomediastinal is around the lungs and the mediastinum. Subclavian is from the arms and chest. Jugular is from the head. Intestinal is from the digestive system. Now, all of these trunks drain into ducts, and there's two ducts. There's the right lymphatic duct, which drains the right arm, the right side of the head, and the thorax. So that takes the right subclavian, the right jugular, and the right bronchiomediastinal. All go to the right lymphatic duct. And then the right lymphatic duct goes into the subclavian vein, right where the internal jugular vein enters the subclavian vein. The thoracic duct starts way down in your abdomen at a place called the cisternae chylae. And it drains both lumbars, the intestinal, the left jugular, the left subclavian, and the left bronchiomediastinal. So it ends up looking like this. It's not symmetrical. The green area here all ends up in the right side. All the pink area from the left side of your face, the entire left side of your body, and everything below the diaphragm bilaterally ends up in the thoracic duct. Now, this all ends up kind of with the azygos system and the hemiazygos, but it ends up running up along the spine here, the thoracic duct, and then curves around and enters the vein right where the brachiocephalic vein starts, where the subclavian and the jugular join. So the subclavian, the jugular, and the duct all come together to form the brachiocephalic vein. On the other side, same deal, comes up and ends up in the same spot. Just the other side. Far less feeding into it. So there's no heart, there's no pump that moves the lymph along. So what does it is actually pulsations in the arteries that are that this runs with, so that the pulse points of those elastic arteries actually, as the artery expands, squeezes the lymphatic vessel, which then increases the pressure in it, which moves it up via the valves in a one-way thing. There's some contraction of the smooth muscle walls also helps, like kind of a peristalsis sort of thing, right? And it also moves the same way that venous return happens, by actions of the skeletal muscle that the lymphatic vessels are in. When the skeletal muscle contracts, that squeezes and then pushes the lymph up, and the a respiratory pump where taking a deep breath lowers the pressure in the thorax. The lower pressure in the thorax actually sucks lymph up to the thorax, up through the two ducts and back towards the heart.